The morning sun peeked through the restaurant's windows as Mai wiped down the tables at Golden Duck Restaurant. The familiar scent of jasmine tea and freshly steamed dumplings filled the air. She'd been working here for 3 years now, ever since she had to leave music school when money got tight. Life had a funny way of changing your plans. Steam rose from the kitchen as the morning prep began. Mai tied her apron, checking her notepad and pens while humming a piece by Mozart, an old habit she couldn't shake. Her fingers tapped quietly against the serving tray, playing invisible piano keys to the melody in her head. The other servers smiled knowingly. They were used to her little musical moments by now. "Table 5 needs more hot water," called out Uncle Wang, the cook who'd been here longer than anyone could remember. Mai grabbed the kettle, gracefully weaving between tables. The restaurant was starting to fill up with the usual morning crowd. Office workers grabbing breakfast, elderly couples sharing dim sum, and students stopping by for bubble tea. In the corner sat the old upright piano, nearly forgotten under a layer of dust and takeout menus. Sometimes, when no one was looking, Mai would gently brush her fingers across its keys, careful not to make a sound. The piano had been there since before she started working, a silent reminder of what she'd left behind. Mrs. Lin, a regular customer who came in every morning for her congee, noticed Mai's distracted glance toward the piano. "You know," she said while stirring her soup, "my mother always said that dreams don't have expiration dates." Mai smiled politely, but the words stuck with her. The lunch rush began, and Mai moved with practiced efficiency, balancing plates of noodles, refilling teacups, and making sure every customer felt welcomed. Between orders, she caught herself swaying to the classical music playing in her mind. A little girl at table 7 watched her with curious eyes and asked her mother, "Why is the waitress dancing?" The afternoon lull brought a moment of peace. While reorganizing the condiment station, Mai found herself lost in thought about the last time she'd properly played piano. It had been during her final recital at music school, right before she had to drop out. The memory of those keys beneath her fingers was still so vivid. Behind the counter, she arranged chopsticks in their holders with the same precision she once used to play scales. Everything in her life had become a kind of music. The rhythm of footsteps on the restaurant floor, the melody of clinking plates, the harmony of voices in conversation. As she cleared away lunch dishes, Mai overheard 2 customers discussing a piano competition coming up in the city. Her heart skipped a beat, but she pushed the thought away. She had responsibilities now, bills to pay, a family to help support. Yet somehow, the music in her head played a little louder that afternoon. The old piano in the corner seemed to watch her as she worked, like it knew something she didn't. What Mai didn't realize was that sometimes the most unexpected moments can change everything. Tomorrow would bring another day of serving tables, but maybe, just maybe, it would bring something more. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the restaurant floor as the lunch rush wound down. Mai's feet ached from the busy shift, but her mind was still caught in the melody she'd been humming all day. The restaurant had emptied except for a few regular customers lingering over their tea, and the quiet afternoon felt like a soft blanket after the morning chaos. While wiping down tables, she kept glancing at the old piano in the corner. Today, something about it seemed different, almost like it was calling to her. The layer of dust had grown thicker, and someone had piled even more takeout menus on top. Yet beneath all that, she knew it was still perfectly in tune. Uncle Wang made sure of that, though no one knew why he bothered. A light drizzle started outside, keeping new customers away. Mai finished her cleaning routine early, finding herself drawn to the piano like a magnet. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. Just one quick piece, she whispered to herself, carefully moving the menus aside. The cover creaked slightly as she lifted it, revealing the familiar black and white keys that had haunted her dreams for 3 years. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the worn bench. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne floated through the air, tentative at first, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. But soon, the music took flight. Mi's fingers remembered every note, every subtle change in tempo. She closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the piece she'd practiced hundreds of times before. In the kitchen, Uncle Wong stopped chopping vegetables, his knife hovering midair as he listened. At their tables, the remaining customers fell silent, teacups paused halfway to their lips. Even the rain seemed to slow its pace to match the rhythm of the music. What May didn't notice was the man who had slipped in to escape the rain. He stood quietly by the door, briefcase in hand, his expensive suit slightly damp. His eyes widened as he listened, recognition flickering across his face at the technical precision hidden within the emotional performance. The final notes of the piece faded away, and reality crashed back in. Mi's eyes snapped open, her cheeks flushing as she realized what she'd done. But before she could apologize for the destruction, the sound of applause filled the restaurant. The elderly couple by the window wiped tears from their eyes, and even grumpy Mr. Chen, who never liked anything, was nodding in approval. The man by the door stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. From his briefcase, he pulled out a business card, holding it carefully like it was made of gold. "I'm the director of the City Music Academy," he said softly, placing the card on the piano. "We're holding special editions next month. I haven't heard anyone play Chopin like that in years." Mai stared at the card, her heart pounding. The director smiled kindly, ordered a pot of oolong tea, and sat down at the nearest table. As she served his tea with trembling hands, he spoke about raw talent and wasted potential, about opportunities that come once in a lifetime. Uncle Wong watched from the kitchen doorway, a proud smile crinkling his eyes. Mrs. Lin, still at her usual table, clutched her hands together in excitement. The afternoon rain continued its gentle pattern against the windows, providing a soft accompaniment to this unexpected moment that would change everything. The business card felt heavy in May's apron pocket for the rest of her shift. Every few minutes, her hand would brush against it, making sure it was real and not just another daydream. The old piano in the corner seemed to stand a little straighter now, as if it knew it had just helped unlock a door that had been closed for far too long. The evening air felt different as Mai walked home that night, the weight of the business card in her pocket matching the weight of decisions in her mind. Street lamps cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk as she replayed the afternoon's events over and over, like a favorite song stuck on repeat. Back at her small apartment, she placed the card on her tiny kitchen table, right next to the stack of bills she'd been avoiding. The director's words echoed in her head. Special editions. Raw talent. Once in a lifetime. Her fingers traced the embossed letters on the card while her other hand automatically prepared a cup of instant noodles, her usual dinner after a long shift. The phone call to her mother didn't go as planned. Music school. Again? Her mother's voice carried years of worry. "Little flower, we barely managed last time. Your brother's university fees are due next month, and your father's health isn't getting any better." Each word felt like a piano key struck in minor key, forming a familiar melody of responsibility and guilt. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Mi lay awake, watching shadows from passing cars dance across her ceiling. She pulled out her old music theory notebooks from under her bed, dusty but still filled with dreams. The pages held more than just notes and exercises. They contained the person she used to be, the future she'd imagined. The next morning at the restaurant, everything looked the same but felt different. As she tied her apron, Uncle Wong called her into the kitchen. His weathered hands were busy folding dumplings, but his eyes held a spark of excitement. "My mother always said that regret tastes more bitter than failure," he said, his wrinkled face serious. "When I was young, I had a chance to open my own restaurant in Hong Kong. I said no because it seemed too risky. 30 years later, I still wonder what if." During her break, May calculated numbers on a napkin, trying to make impossible math work. The regular customers noticed her distraction. Mrs. Lin left an extra-large tip with a note. For piano lessons. The elderly couple who'd witnessed her performance the day before asked if she'd play at their granddaughter's wedding. Paid, of course. The lunch rush brought an unexpected visitor, the director's assistant, a kind-faced woman who ordered wonton soup and left information about scholarships. The director was impressed, she said quietly. He thinks you have something special. Raw talent can't be taught, but technique can be polished. That afternoon, between serving tables, May found herself standing by the piano again. This time, she noticed something she'd missed before. A small inscription carved into the wood. Music speaks what cannot be expressed. Her reflection in the polished black surface showed both who she was and who she could become. By closing time, her fellow servers had heard about the opportunity. They gathered around as she cleaned tables, offering encouragement and practical solutions. I can cover your Tuesday shifts, one said. My cousin needs weekend work, added another. Their support wrapped around her like a warm hug, making the impossible seem a little more possible. That night, as she walked home, Maya took a different route, past the City Music Academy. The building stood tall and imposing, its windows glowing softly in the evening light. A student was practicing inside, the faint sound of a violin drifting through the walls. May closed her eyes and listened, allowing herself to imagine walking through those doors not as a passerby, but as a student. Back home, she pulled out the business card again. Her tiny apartment felt cramped with the weight of decision, but something had shifted. The stack of bills still sat on her table. The responsibilities hadn't disappeared, but now they shared space with possibility. She picked up her phone and began to dial the number, her heart playing its own symphony of fear and hope. The morning light streamed through Mi's apartment window, illuminating a mess of papers spread across her small table. Budget calculations, scholarship forms, and work schedules created a puzzle she'd been trying to solve all night. Her morning tea had gone cold, forgotten during hours of planning and replanning. At work, the usual rhythm of the restaurant felt different now. Every table she served, every pot of tea she poured became part of a countdown. The regular customers could sense the change in her, like musicians noticing a shift in tempo. Mrs. Lin watched her with grandmotherly concern, while Uncle Wong kept sending encouraging nods from his spot by the stove. During a quiet moment, she found herself in the storage room, digging through old boxes. Hidden behind stacks of takeout containers, she discovered a photo of the restaurant's opening day. There was Uncle Wong, decades younger, standing proudly by the same piano she now played. When she showed him the photo, his eyes grew misty. That piano, he said, chopping ginger with practiced strokes, was my wife's. She played every weekend until she got sick. Music brings life to any place it touches. The afternoon brought an unexpected visit from her mother, who rarely left their neighborhood across town. They sat at a corner table during Mi's break, steam rising from bowls of noodle soup between them. Your father and I, her mother began, hands wrapped tightly around her teacup. We didn't come to this country to be rich. We came so our children could have choices. Her voice cracked slightly. But choices are never simple, are they? That evening, her coworkers gathered for their usual end-of-shift meeting. Instead of the regular scheduled discussion, they surprised her with a plan they'd created. A handmade calendar showed how they could cover her shifts during practice times. Someone's aunt offered piano lessons at a discount. Even grumpy Mr. Chen, the demanding regular customer, mentioned his brother taught at the music academy and could help with preparation. Walking home that night, Mai stopped at the park where street musicians often played. An old man sat there with his erhu, drawing mournful notes that floated on the evening air. She dropped a few coins in his case, and he smiled, gesturing for her to sit. Music, he said, continuing to play, is the only thing that grows bigger when you share it. Back in her apartment, she found a message from her younger brother. He'd sent a video of himself practicing basketball at university with a note. Remember when you used to play piano at my games? The team really misses their good luck charm. The memory hit her hard. How she'd rush from music practice to his games, still in her performance clothes, just to support his dreams. Late into the night, Mai sat at her kitchen table again, but this time with a different energy. She spread out fresh paper and began to write, not numbers this time, but a plan. The scholarship forms didn't seem as daunting now. The practice hours looked more like opportunities than obstacles. Even the budget, though tight, showed possibilities she hadn't seen before. Her phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Wong. Kitchen needs cleaning tomorrow morning. Piano needs playing too. Come early? She smiled, knowing he was offering more than just extra work hours. The old piano had become her practice space, and the early morning quiet her rehearsal hall. As she finally prepared for bed, Meade caught her reflection in the window. Behind her, pinned to the wall, were the things that defined her life now. Her work schedule, family photos, bills, and the Music Academy's business card. But instead of seeing them as competing forces, she began to see them as different instruments in the same orchestra, each playing its part in a larger symphony. She fell asleep that night to the sound of distant traffic and the hum of city life, her mind already composing tomorrow's melody, one where dreams and duties didn't fight each other, but danced together in perfect harmony. Dawn hadn't yet broken when May unlocked the restaurant's back door. The kitchen was silent, no sizzling woks or clanging pots, just her, the old piano, and the first hint of sunrise peeking through the windows. Her fingers, still stiff from sleep, found their place on the keys as naturally as breathing. The morning practice sessions became her new routine. Each day, she arrived 2 hours before her shift, filling the empty restaurant with scales and arpeggios. Uncle Wong would appear silently, preparing the day's ingredients while listening, occasionally humming along to familiar pieces. Sometimes he'd leave a steaming bowl of congee on the piano top, knowing she'd forgotten breakfast again. Between serving customers, she'd mentally practice, her fingers tapping rhythms on serving trays. Regular customers began to notice the change in her. A new confidence in her step, a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The lunch rush became her exercise in multitasking. Memorizing music passages while remembering table orders, mentally reviewing finger positions while pouring tea. One busy afternoon, she dropped a stack of plates, the crash interrupting her mental rehearsal of a particularly difficult piece. As she knelt to clean up the mess, tears of frustration threatening to fall, the elderly couple at table 6 left their seats to help. When our daughter was learning violin, the old man said, picking up ceramic shards, she practiced so much she fell asleep at dinner. Now she plays for the city orchestra. After closing time, Mai would stay late, practicing until her fingers ached and the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the restaurant floor. One evening, a group of high school students peered through the window, drawn by the music. They started coming regularly, doing their homework at the tables while she practiced, occasionally asking questions about the pieces she played. Her tip jar slowly filled with notes marked for piano books and for music lessons. The restaurant's regulars had become her unofficial support team. Mrs. Lin brought her grandson's outgrown metronome. A university student who always ordered the same noodle soup helped her record her practice sessions on his phone, showing her how to listen for mistakes. The physical demands began to show. Her shoulders ached from hours of practice, followed by carrying heavy trays. Her feet burned from standing through double shifts to make up for the mornings she now spent practicing. But each time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the director's words about raw talent and pushed through one more hour, one more piece. One morning, as she practiced a particularly challenging section, something clicked. The notes that had been fighting each other suddenly flowed together like a stream finding its path. Uncle Wong, who had been chopping vegetables, stopped to listen. "That," he said, pointing his knife at the piano, "that right there is what we've been waiting to hear." The restaurant itself seemed to transform. Customers lingered longer, drawn by the music that now regularly filled the space. Even during busy hours, Mai would sneak in a few minutes at the piano between serving tables. The old instrument had come alive again, its voice growing stronger with each passing day, as if it too was preparing for something important. Late one night, as she finally gathered her things to leave, she found a small package wrapped in newspaper on the piano. Inside was a faded book of advanced piano techniques, with a note in Uncle Wong's shaky handwriting. "This belonged to my wife. She would want you to have it." The pages were filled with handwritten notes in Chinese, little secrets and tips from a pianist who had once faced her own challenges. Walking home that night, Mi's tired feet barely touched the ground. The city's nighttime sounds, car horns, distant trains, the hum of streetlights, blended into a symphony of possibility. Tomorrow would bring more practices, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But tonight, in the quiet of her heart, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The morning of the audition dawned gray and humid, with rain clouds threatening overhead. Mai had barely slept, her dreams filled with dancing piano keys and forgotten musical scores. She'd planned everything perfectly. Her outfit was pressed, her sheet music organized, her routine memorized. But life, as always, had other plans. The morning rush at the restaurant was unexpectedly chaotic. A tour bus had broken down nearby, flooding the small space with hungry travelers. Orders piled up, teacups needed constant refilling, and the kitchen was drowning in tickets. Mi's hands moved automatically between tables, her mind stuck on the clock taking away precious minutes. "Go," Uncle Wong finally said, pushing her toward the door. "We'll manage." But as she rushed to leave, she knocked over a pot of soup, sending it crashing to the floor. The cleaning took precious minutes she didn't have. By the time she finally got out, fat raindrops were already falling from the sky. The subway station was packed with people seeking shelter from the rain. Mai squeezed into a crowded car, clutching her folder of sheet music to her chest. 3 stops in, the train ground to a halt. "Signal problems," crackled the announcement. Her heart pounded as she checked the time. 30 minutes until the audition. 20 agonizing minutes later, the train finally moved. Mai burst out at her stop, racing up the wet stairs. The rain had turned into a downpour, and she'd forgotten her umbrella in her rush. Her carefully pressed clothes grew damp, and her sheet music threatened to dissolve in the rain. The Music Academy looked even more imposing in the gray weather, its stone steps slick with rain. Inside, Mi's wet shoes squeaked against the polished floor as she followed the signs to the audition room. Her waitress uniform was hidden under a borrowed blazer, now spotted with raindrops. 5 minutes to spare. In the waiting area, other candidates sat with their expensive instruments and professionally printed scores. A young man in a tailored suit was practicing finger movements in the air. A woman in a concert dress was doing breathing exercises. Mai pulled out Uncle Wong's wife's old technique book, its pages warm with memories and encouragement. Number 23, called the assistant. Mai stood, her legs shaking slightly. As she walked into the audition room, she caught her reflection in a window. Hair slightly frizzy from the rain, a small soup stain on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed before. But her eyes were bright with determination. The grand piano in the audition room was nothing like the old upright at the restaurant. Its surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights, pristine and intimidating. The panel of judges sat behind a long table, their faces neutral, papers ready for notes. The director who had visited the restaurant nodded slightly in recognition. Mai took a deep breath, remembering the early mornings at the restaurant, the countless hours of practice, the support of her makeshift family of customers and coworkers. She thought of Uncle Wong's wife's notes in the technique book, of Mrs. Lin's encouraging smiles, of her mother's worried but proud eyes. Her fingers found the keys, and suddenly, she wasn't in an audition room anymore. She was back in the restaurant, playing for the regulars who had become family. The music flowed from her hands like the rain outside, each note clear and purposeful. The classical piece transformed into something more. It carried the sounds of sizzling woks, clinking teacups, and early morning practice sessions. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Mi's heart thundered in her chest. One of the judges had closed his eyes. Another was writing furiously. The director leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You changed the ending," he said finally. Mi's heart sank. She hadn't even realized she'd done it, caught up in the emotion of the moment. But then she saw it, the smallest hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. It was unexpected, different, like hearing the piece for the first time again. As she walked out of the audition room on shaky legs, the rain had stopped. A patch of blue sky peeped through the clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. Whether she had succeeded or failed, Mai knew one thing for certain. She had played her truth, and sometimes that's all that matters. The wait after the audition felt longer than all her years of serving tables combined. Mai threw herself into work, trying not to check her phone every 5 minutes. The regular customers watched her with barely concealed anticipation, each day asking with their eyes rather than words if there was any news. One quiet afternoon, while she was arranging teacups, her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the Music Academy's number. Her hands trembled so much that Uncle Wong had to take the teacups from her before they fell. She stepped into the storage room, heart pounding, and answered the call. The news wasn't what she'd expected. "We'd like to offer you conditional acceptance." The director's voice crackled through the phone. "It's an unusual arrangement, but then again, you're an unusual candidate." The program would allow her to take evening classes while maintaining reduced hours at the restaurant. Not exactly the full scholarship she dreamed of, but something even better, a chance to keep both worlds. When she emerged from the storage room, tears streaming down her face, the entire restaurant held its breath. Then she smiled, and the place erupted in celebration. Mrs. Lin hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. Uncle Wong disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a special dish he usually only made for Chinese New Year. Even the delivery boy, who barely spoke to anyone, gave her a thumbs up. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Her fellow servers helped create a new schedule that would accommodate her classes. Regular customers who worked in education offered textbooks and study tips. The elderly couple who'd first applauded her playing brought in their daughter, now a professional musician, who spent an afternoon sharing invaluable advice about balancing practice and work. Her mother visited the restaurant again, this time with a small package wrapped in newspaper. Inside was her old metronome from high school. "Your father fixed it," she said softly. "He worked on it a little bit each day after his shift." The simple gift spoke volumes about her parents' growing acceptance of her path. The restaurant itself began to transform. Uncle Wong cleared a proper space around the piano, removing the stacks of takeout menus and giving it a thorough cleaning. Regular customers started requesting specific pieces during their meals. Someone suggested having weekly musical dinner nights, and soon Friday evenings became a special event, with Mai playing between serving tables. Word spread about the restaurant with the waitress who played piano. Food critics who came for the dumplings stayed for the music. Local music students began dropping by to practice during slow hours, turning a humble dining room into an unofficial conservatory. The old piano had never been so busy, its voice growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as Mai practiced a new piece for her upcoming class, she noticed a young girl watching her intently from a corner table. During her break, the girl's mother explained that her daughter wanted to learn piano, but was too shy to start lessons. Mai found herself sharing stories about her own journey, realizing that her path might inspire others to chase their dreams, no matter how unlikely they seemed. The balance wasn't perfect. Some days, her fingers were too tired from carrying plates to practice properly. Other times, she'd nearly fall asleep during theory classes after a long shift. But the struggles felt different now. more like challenges to overcome than barriers to stop her. Looking back, the moment that changed everything wasn't the director's visit or even the audition. It was that ordinary afternoon when she'd finally gathered the courage to play the dusty piano, not knowing who might be listening. Life rarely moves in straight lines, she realized. Sometimes the path to your dreams winds through unexpected places, like a small family restaurant where the smell of dumplings mingles with Mozart. 6 months later, Mai still tied on her apron each morning, but now it felt less like a symbol of what she couldn't do and more like a reminder of how far she'd come. The restaurant had become more than just her workplace. It was her practice room, her stage, her second home. And as she moved between tables, her mind already on the evening's music theory class, she understood that some dreams don't replace your life, they complete it.